touch on, and we're going to take up with that part again next week, the last final kingdom, the fifth kingdom. All right, so that's how we're going to proceed as we open up this interesting passage. So first we have Daniel's general description of what Nebuchadnezzar said as a whole. Excuse me, I've got a little bit of a frog in my throat. I think it'll eventually work its way out. I hope it doesn't do so in a... I'll stop there. I could not think of how to delicately say that. So all right, first of all, Daniel declares in verse 31, "You, O king, were watching, and behold a great image." Now the Aramaic literally says, "And behold one image that was great," or one great image. So there seems to be in the language here an emphasis on the fact that the image was one. It was a whole. It was one great image or statue. You see, from one perspective, all of the different kingdoms represented in this image are ultimately one. They are all but variations of that one dominion of foreign powers over the people of God from the time of the destruction of the Old Covenant theocracy. Now, you may remember when I introduced the book of Daniel, it was pointed out that the fall of Judah and the destruction of the temple and the exile into Babylon, that marked the end of the independent existence of Israel as a theocratic state. It marked the end of that forever. And it marked the beginning of the subjugation of the Old Covenant people of God to foreign powers, leading up to the establishment of the New Covenant church at the time of Christ. Well, you see, in one sense, these different kingdoms under which the people of God would be subjugated until that time when Christ came, they're all just various administrations of this one dominion of heathen world power, all of which, in spite of their many differences, are one in their essentially pagan nature and in their overall mindset of hostility toward God and biblical religion. So you can see the propriety then of this revelation being given in the form of one great image. The one great image representing, as we're going to see, the heathen world powers under which the people of God were subjugated. So Daniel says, "You, O king, were watching, and behold, one image that was great." And then he goes on, "This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome." It was an awe-inspiring and fearful thing, an apt picture of the great majesty and the awe-inspiring and intimidating nature of the heathen kingdoms represented by this image. And as we're going to see later, the majesty and immensity of this statue presents a striking contrast with that little stone, that seemingly insignificant stone that later he sees in the dream that crushes this great image to powder. So much for Daniel's general description. Let's begin to look now at some of the details of the dream and its interpretation, beginning first of all with the head of gold. We'll consider first the head of gold and its interpretation. Daniel says in verse 32a, "This image's head was of fine gold." Now you skip down to verse 36 to 38, and he tells us what this head of gold represents. Verse 36, "This is the dream. Now he's probably speaking of him and his friends, perhaps who were with him, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He says, "This is the dream. Now we will tell the interpretation of it before the king. You, O king, are a king of kings. For the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven, He has given them into your hand and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold." Okay? Pretty simple interpretation, right? Daniel interprets it there for us. The head of gold represents Nebuchadnezzar.